Before we get into the stories, I would like to let you all know that I'm taking story submissions to narrate. I will credit you in the description of the video unless you ask me not to, so if you have an experience or story in mind that you would like me to read, then you can email me at feedingonfear@gmail.com, and I will be sure to include it in my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the stories. The movie was horrible. Sadly, the best part about it was the overpriced Dr. Pepper I bought beforehand. I wish I could say that the worst parts were the sappy Christmas scenes and the dingy bathrooms. No, the worst was yet to come. Nonetheless, the whole thing absolutely reeked of cheesiness and soft-headed romance. It happened around the point that I realized that the movie was going nowhere but downhill, and pretty fast by the looks of it. Looking around me at the sparsely packed theater, I could see several people with glazed-over eyes, their entire beings infiltrated by this horrendous Christmas romance. A few of them had other people along with them, who were all either sleeping or checking their watches impatiently. I stood up to leave when suddenly the movie was cut short, and the lights were turned on. For a split second, I thought that somehow I had done something wrong, though I quickly realized that would be ridiculous. I stood there confused, waiting for something to happen. After much complaining from the girls and cries of relief from the boys, a greasy teenager stumbled in with an expression of pure terror on his face. I recognized him as the one who had sold me my Dr. Pepper. "Out! Out! Everybody get out and just go home! I've got no time to explain, just leave, all of you!" He was clearly in absolute terror of some unknown horror. There was a bit of baffled murmuring before an old woman stood up from her seat. "But I paid $50 for me and my young'uns," she hollered amidst a swarm of children. The terrified soda vendor took out his wallet and threw a wad of cash in her general direction, yelling, "You've got your money, now go," with a stiff finger pointed at the exit, trembling. When I finally made it outside, I was absolutely blown away by the chaos that met my eyes. It was as if every inmate from every asylum for the criminally insane had broken loose. Police were beating people ruthlessly. Cars were ramming into everything within reach. People were slaughtering each other in the parking lot. Children screamed for their mothers, and I needed to just find out what was going on. So I found a man who looked safe enough to approach. "Excuse me, sir, can you tell me what the hell is going on out here?" He just stared at me hopelessly, with tears welled up in his eyes. "You don't know?" He was barely audible over the surrounding cacophony of madness. I shook my head no. "We're gonna die. They're gonna kill all of us. We're going to burn." "Who's going to kill us? What's gonna make us burn?" He blinked at me, fresh tears rolling down his face. "The nukes. They're gonna drop right here in this city." "Who is doing this?" He just shrugged his shoulders sadly and shuffled along, seemingly in a daze. I simply stood there dumbfounded. I was hardly aware of the anarchy around me, and I just kept thinking, who's dropping the bombs? It couldn't be true, it just can't. It was less than a week before Christmas. There was no way this was happening. But I knew the man had been telling the truth. Whether it was ISIS or North Korea or the disciples of the worm, I had no clue. Each was an equally viable possibility, and catastrophe was nigh. It eventually occurred to me to try and verify what the man had said, so I went from person to person, but they either didn't know anything, or had told me one of the groups that I'd guessed before. It wasn't until a police officer smashed me in the face and told me to go home that I snapped out of my panic. At first I started to walk back towards my car, but soon realized that there would be no way to get out of the parking lot amidst this pandemonium, given that the car was even still intact. Luckily, I only lived a few blocks away from the Winston Cinema, so it wouldn't take all that long to get home by foot, but who knew how long would be too long. The journey home wasn't much better than the parking lot. Every law there was under the sun seemed to have been thrown out the window. Vehicles lay stranded in the road, people lay injured or dying in the streets. Gunshots and explosions were incessantly sounding in the near distance, mostly from police, but also some from civilians. Some of those areas also had tear gas being implemented, but luckily I managed to skirt around those areas. It wasn't until I was nearly home that the tornado sirens went off, and I knew all too well that it wasn't tornadoes. Those sirens were manifest omens of death. Banshees wailing in the distance for all to hear, all to know. Cold, chilling, and ghastly, all of these words apply. It didn't matter if you plugged your ears, nor does it matter now that my ears have been blasted completely deaf. They are always sounding, always echoing in my head, always reminding me of my imminent death. They may have grown long silent since, but they might still as well be going off. Finally and miraculously, I managed to make it home without much difficulty. After locking and bolting all the doors and windows to keep people from breaking in, I immediately put my cat Forrest into his carrier and brought him downstairs to the basement, along with his food and a bowl of water. I then brought all of my canned and non-frozen food down, followed by all of my drinks. I scoured my kitchen for any jars and containers, emptied and rinsed them. Filled some with water and brought them down as well. It was as I was going back up for pillows and blankets that I first heard the screeching of metal hurtling through the air. I barely had time to register the noise before the loudest, most godforsaken blast met my body and ears, which ultimately knocked me out. As I woke up on the ground later in complete darkness in what felt like an industrial furnace, my first thoughts were that I'd died and gone to hell. Well, if half of that was true, I may not have died, but I certainly have went to hell. I can feel my death coming soon. Everyone I ever knew or care about is most likely dead. My friends, my family, all gone, all of them. I knew I shouldn't leave the basement, but the heat was unbearable. There's no hope anymore, none whatsoever. All I can do now is sit in this burning world and wait for that dark angel to take me away from this place. Yet despite my hopeless situation, something pushes me onwards in my meager and painful existence. I still drink this irradiated shit and still eat my irradiated food. I still kept on living after I crawled out of my basement into these charred ruins. I still kept going after Forrest died, purring and stick from radiation in my lap. I still breathe even though the air burns my lungs. Something keeps me going. Looking around me, all I see is decay and ruin. The sun never shines anymore. The rain is black and the ash that hangs in the air pricks at my skin. I can barely breathe, and when I cough, blood comes out. It feels as if my organs are rotting and melting, which probably isn't too far from the actual truth. I write this in the hopes that maybe somebody, someday, will find this and read it. I want the children of tomorrow to know just what exactly took place here in Winston in the year 2030. Maybe, just maybe, humanity will learn from its mistakes, but my hopes aren't high. Because we obviously didn't learn from Nagasaki or Hiroshima, we still wage war and destruction, even though all it does is tear us apart. At least now I can rest with the knowledge that I made some attempt to change the future. All I can do now is hope, despite how hopeless this all seems. Everyone hated Grady. All these decades later, I can still clearly recall when he moved to our quiet little town early one year and into a large house down the road from my own modest home. His parents had left him an enormous inheritance, and he took great pleasure in flaunting his wealth at every opportunity. But we didn't despise Grady because he was well off. We hated him because he was a pestilence that wreaked havoc throughout our once peaceful community, and there was nothing we could do about it. Grady believed his money meant he could do whatever he wanted, without consequence, and he was right. He was a pampered and inept man, far too lazy to do anything for himself, and nowhere near clever, yet highly proficient at ensuring the right people were paid off. When an elderly schoolteacher berated Grady for speeding past the playground and nearly running over a small boy, her house mysteriously burnt down. When a waitress at the local diner rebuked Grady's advances, her father was attacked by two masked men during his regular evening jog and suffered a brain injury. When the police were in Grady's pocket, on the rare occasion when someone tried to report him, the case always managed to somehow get swept under the rug. Simply avoiding Grady wasn't enough. Sometimes he appeared to select his targets at random. Even innocuous, mundane actions could incur his terrible wrath. By the time hurricane season rolled around, the threat of dangerous weather wasn't the only thing the townsfolk were living in fear of. Then one night he drunkenly ran over my dog, and I really began to hate Grady. When news of an impending storm reached us, many opted to evacuate. I chose to stay behind, and so did Grady. I'm not sure why he didn't leave or make any sort of preparations beyond purchasing a portable generator. I suppose his ego made him feel invincible. The wind whipped through the trees, and rain poured down, and the power predictably went out. After it was all over, I drove around to survey the damage. I returned to see Grady, lost without his creature comforts, attempting to set up his new generator. With almost everyone gone or preoccupied with the storm's fallout, it seemed Grady finally had to get his own hands dirty. He obviously had no clue what he was doing. And an idea occurred to me, so I made my way to Grady's house. Days passed. Eventually the police knocked down his door and discovered him dead in his bed, eyes closed in eternal sleep. In the next room sat his generator. The explanation was a tragic accident that happens every hurricane season. Carbon monoxide poisoning. And as I watched them carry the body bag out of Grady's house, I thought back to our last conversation. I'd be happy to help you set that up, Grady, but if you run it outside, someone's gonna steal it. The safest place to keep it is inside the house. My name is Tyler Cuvert, and this is a message for my family. Sandy, I love you, and I have always loved you, and I will always love you. I'm so sorry that it has to be this way, but I don't see any way around it now. I don't want you to watch anything else on this video. Not under any circumstances. If it comes on TV, you change the channel. And if they give you this tape, then I don't want you to keep it. I want you to always think of me as the person you knew while I was alive. You remember that trip we took to Costa Rica right after college? Remember how the sun beat down on the beach during that day, and how we spent the night together on the pavilion, just watching the moon over the waves? I hope I'll see you again someday, somewhere sunnier than Costa Rica in the summertime. Jordan, you're my little girl. I want you to be strong for Dad, okay? Mom is going to need you to be there for her for a while. I won't be able to be there for you like I wish I could be, but you have your mom and you have your grandparents to help you out. So I'm not too worried about you. Just keep on keeping on. I know you don't know about Costa Rica yet, but maybe you can go there when you get older. It's a beautiful place, and there's nothing in this world quite like seeing a toucan steal your sandwich on a warm day. Just study hard in school, stay away from sleazy guys in fast cars, and make your dad proud. Maybe I'll give this to you guys in person, and we can all have a good laugh, but more likely, I'm not going to make it down this mountain. I miss you both so much right now. Just know that you are always in my heart. McCoy Peak on Black Mountain is the highest point in the Blue Ridge of western North Carolina, standing out against the sky at sunset like some ancient sleeping giant. It's easy enough to see how Black Mountain got its name. However, the peak's legacy is more firmly attached to a video clip recovered by the United States Coast Guard during a search following a freak blizzard in early November 2012. Tyler Cuvert, along with the husband and wife pair of Jonathan and Carrie Bleak, were caught out in the storm. Why they were on the mountain at all so late in the year, much less near the notoriously dangerous McCoy Peak, is unknown, although hints early in the video suggest that the three have been looking for some sort of archaeological site on the hill's northern flank. Given that both members of the Bleak family were instructors of Native American history at the nearby University of Western North Carolina, and given that Tyler was aspiring to the same office, this seems a rational enough assumption. Regardless, it hardly seems important that the three ill-fated explorers were searching for. No site of historical importance has ever been located on Black Mountain. Although the unusual topography and enormous scale of the hill, more of a ridgeline than a normal mountain, stretching nearly 9.5 miles east to west, makes it difficult to say for certain what they may have been looking for. Substantially more important are the details of what happened after the group wandered off the beaten path. Black Mountain, like most publicly accessible hills in the state, is crisscrossed with hiking trails. One of these, the McCoy Summit Trail, Black Mountain, like most publicly accessible hills in the state, is crisscrossed with hiking trails, one of these being the McCoy Summit Trail. It's closed from mid-October through mid-April due to the dangers of winter at altitudes of over 7,000 feet. This, however, did not stop Tyler and his group from traipsing through the line of warning signs and beginning their ascent from the parking lot of the closed visitor center. The three continued up the trail, up through relatively flat areas, some with even wooden stairs, and then on into relative wilderness. At higher points on the trail, the beaten path became weakly trodden and narrow, ascending and then briefly descending, then picking up again until at last the path came to a near stop. A brief hike up a boulder field, slick with any ice trickle of water coming down from the well-known Boone Spring, would have taken out the group to the mountain's wind-blown edge. However, apparently in search of whatever they had come to Black Mountain for in the first place, the group chose to skirt the strewn field and walk along the lower flank of the mountain's ridge. It quickly becomes apparent from watching the tape that all members of the group were freezing. Unbeknownst to them, a squall line was moving south, driven down out of New England by the sudden influx of a mass of cold air from Canada. Their first hint of snow comes less than 20 minutes before the viewer realizes that they're in serious trouble. Although Carrie, the first to notice flurries dropping from the gray sky above, looks at the camera and jokingly suggests that the mountain will become a winter wonderland. The danger seems to have been more apparent to the cameraman. One of the most infamous frames of the video, sometimes hailed as the voice of Cassandra speaking truth about wilderness survival, is the one in which Tyler, with his camera pointed at the dead pine needles below his feet, says, "I think we may want to turn back if it's starting to snow." Whether it was already too late is irrelevant. With their goal solidly in mind, the two other members of the expedition stood firm in their desire to move on, and Tyler made the decision to go with them. The three walked for a few minutes, a high cliff stretching up to the ridge on their southern side, and a steep hill leaning down towards the valley far below on the other. When flurries became more visible and began to accumulate, there was another brief discussion about turning back, this time beginning with Carrie. However, this discussion is much more difficult to discern clearly. At this point, the footage experiences severe audio distortion, something commonly associated with what reviewers of the film have called the Hound, or perhaps more accurately, the Watcher. Regardless of the decision reached, the snow picks up by the end of the conversation, to the point where turning back is already impossible. The cliff face could lead the group back nearby to the trail. That much is true, but after it terminates there are still a few hundred more feet of tangled alpine forest, and the trail is not clear enough so high up. The group apparently decided, off-camera, to wait out what they hoped to be a brief snow. The next video, probably taken hours later, includes the group huddled up against a rock lower on the hill, which they had made the decision to use as a windbreak. Jonathan is visible in the film trying to start a fire and eventually succeeding. Despite being dressed for normal winter weather, no one in the group appears to be dressed for the kind of weather coming with the squall line, and it clearly cuts like a knife. Normal edited versions of the McCoy Peak footage do not attempt to duplicate the few snippets of conversation and interviews with Tyler, trying to keep spirits up during the storm. Usually only the most important points are included, particularly Carrie and Jonathan explaining their jobs at Western Carolina and Tyler explaining his work as a wedding photographer after graduation with a master's degree in anthropology, and no prospects of obtaining a PhD following the birth of his daughter. Tyler takes care to note that his daughter matters more to him than any degree or job could have ever gotten. It's sometime shortly after nightfall when the McCoy Peak footage takes a darker turn. Our first view of the Watcher comes at this point, although it's very unclear whether or not Taylor understood what he was filming it, as the day becomes rapidly darker, and the storm shows no sign of letting up, the filmmaker tries the night vision feature on his camera. Through the lens, we are able to briefly see this creature, moving on all fours like a strange deer. Snow obscures our view, and the being is certainly difficult to make out in infrared. Nevertheless, it is clearly there, less than 50 feet out from the campsite. It looks briefly at the camera, and perhaps able to see the flicker of fire, but unfortunately unable to detect human movement through the snow. Things like the Watcher have been reported from California in the west, the Mexican highland in the south, coastal North Carolina in the east, and Nunavak in the north. While being relegated to North America, they appear to inhabit relatively underpopulated areas across the country. It's unclear what the range of a single Watcher may be, what its diet might consist of, and what numbers exist in the wild, although there clearly cannot be many. No Watcher had ever been captured on camera alive in the wild before the McCoy Peak footage, and reports were assumed to be legendary for many years. Most reports were undoubtedly fictitious, particularly given the wide levels of intelligence associated with Watchers in different stories, ranging from the animalistic fury associated with the Watcher and the possible hoax circulated on the internet as behind the line of trees, all the way to the city building associated with the Watchers describing by New Age guru Francis Cobalt. No Watcher has ever been recovered, either dead or alive, and so it is difficult to assess any claims about the creatures, other than the near-unanimous description of their blindness to motionless prey. It is difficult, viewing the quick eye movements of the Watcher in this film, to believe that members of the species are entirely without intelligence. Although Tyler appears to have not noticed the creature before it could slink off back into the forest, he does demonstrate marked nervousness for the rest of the night. Strange sounds cause him to bring the camera back to bear. Audio enhancement performed on the video by California's Industrial Light and Magic suggests that an unusual pattern of infrasound, most likely coming from the Watcher, may have been the cause for his anxiety. It's during one of these frightened episodes, trying to fight off sleep, that Tyler views Jonathan walking just into the forest with a flaming stick from the fire. Whatever provoked his fear this time, it also seems to have disturbed the others. Tyler watches for a moment before Jonathan starts to come back, and it is in that moment that the Watcher finally makes its move. We see a flurry of motion, too rapid for the video to detect. Carrie yells something and Tyler jumps out from the shadow of the windbreak, stopping suddenly when he realizes that Jonathan is already gone from the view of the camera. His torch lies on the ground, bright enough that Tyler snaps off the night vision and lingers on its glow. Snow whirls and dances in the torchlight, the wind of the blizzard threatening to silence it forever, and then from the distance come the screams. The first is clearly Jonathan's. It lasts for only a moment before choking out into the blackness, and the second is clearly not human. It forces Tyler back towards the windbreak to watch silently as terrifying night goes on toward horrifying day. Now all conversation has stopped. The fire begins to die, and Tyler makes a brief foray back into the forest, looking carefully for firewood. Thanks to poor planning, however, the group has not gathered enough to last, and all that Tyler can find is covered with snow. He brings some back, attempting to brush it off, but the wood is too wet to burn, and within the hour the fire dies, leaving Carrie and Tyler alone in the cold. At some point, the footage cuts off, with only one more snippet of video recorded just before dawn. Natural light illuminates the scene as Taylor gently tries to wake Carrie. After failing, he touches his fingers to her neck and then moves them away, appearing to cross himself while holding the camera with the other hand. With day rapidly growing brighter, it becomes obvious that the squall has subsided. Heavy snow now falls vertically, enormous flakes that make the forest look like the winter wonderland that Carrie had predicted. As soon as the light is strong enough for Taylor to see clearly in all directions, he starts out from the windbreak, back up towards the cliff where he had been the night before. Tyler seems unable to run, too weak and short of breath to maintain more than a stumbling walk. He strains to reach the cliff, then slowly moves along its side, an easy hike the day prior suddenly becoming much more difficult. It quickly becomes obvious to the viewer how unlikely it is that the cameraman will reach the bottom of the mountain, even if he makes his way to the trail. and then all hope is lost. Regardless of the authenticity of the dubious Texas record, it's clear that the primary method of hunting for a watcher is recorded accurately in its name. The creature simply waits out its prey, in this case a human being. Another hint that the beings are intelligent. Perhaps, although Tyler moves back too quickly for the creature to have seen him, it's clearly standing in his way, staring upward on the path out. Also seems to have positioned itself strategically on the path, on which Tyler would certainly not have the strength to bypass. For the first time, the size of its eyes become clear. Both look like fish bowls, giving it a nearly 180-degree panoramic view. This time, this creature stands upright rather than prowling like a dog. It looks disturbingly like a man, except for its vaguely reptilian flesh. The footage is cut off here. We see a few more shots taken from ground level of the cameraman breaking a branch from the tree and tying a long bowie knife to it with his shoelace. He seems determined to fasten the knife securely. Then he goes into his dialogue addressed to his family and vanishes into history. The Cuvert family has never been contacted by reputable journalistic sources, out of respect for their loss. Tabloids are turned down unanimously, and from all reports they seem to have never viewed the film, except for occasional and inevitable snippets on the news. While they are obviously not in the dark regarding its content, they have chosen to shun the limelight that the videos obtained. If a scientific name is ever decided on for the watchers, however, it's likely to include the Cuvert name, in honor of the man who taught humanity a lesson it was able to forget for hundreds of years. There are some places of this earth which it is better to shun than to explore.